Okay, I think we're live. Hey, everybody, how's it going? Chuck Holton here. Thank you for watching the Hot Zone. Or, I'm sorry, we're on CBN YouTube today. uh, and I hope you're having a good Friday. I just got back from a long hike and I am beat. But we got a lot to talk about. So thank you for being with us. And we are going to uh, have a very interesting discussion tonight. There's You know, the world is changing very rapidly, just right before our eyes. I mean, what a time to be alive. We have uh, the opportunity to basically witness history in the making, and especially when it comes to what's going on in the Middle East. So I think it bears being reminded that Israel did not ask for any of this. It was foisted on Israel against its wishes, obviously, in the most brutal possible way. And it also bears repeating that if you look back through the history of the Israeli state, Israel has never started a war with anybody, but they've also never lost a war with anybody. And that's kind of important to know. I'm trying to see if I can move this around here. Uh, it's not going to lose this one either. But we're coming to the point in this conflict where people are really starting to consider, well, what does this look like on the morning after the war is over? We're still probably a long way off from having the war completed. I mean, it may still go on for a year or more, but in real terms, the Israelis have had some huge successes. And I wanted to start with that because when you look at some of the pundits out there on social media and in the mainstream news, they will, I mean, you'll hear people actually saying that Israel is losing this war. Israel is being decimated in this conflict. And having spent more than 6 months over there in the past year, I can tell you that's just not true. It's just simply not true. I mean, we can talk about the fact that Hamas has been defeated as a military force. Hamas is not a threat militarily anymore to the Jewish state. Now, they're still fighting the remnants of Hamas, and the Hamas fighters that are left in Gaza, there are probably a couple thousand of those guys, um, are certainly able to pull together, maybe even coordinate a little bit, and to put up a fight against the remaining IDF that are in Gaza. But they're not going to be a threat to the Israeli people anymore for quite some time, if ever. The rocket fire has all but ceased out of Gaza. There were, as you know, tens of thousands of rockets uh, that Hamas had that they could have fired. And they did fire something along the lines of 9,000 of them, but they they're no more. Very few rockets now being fired out of Gaza. If you look at a map before and after of Gaza from before October 7th until now, it's stunning. I mean, they have made Gaza into, I mean, it looks like they've made it into a parking lot. This is obviously terrible for the people in Gaza. So you should be careful what you vote for. That's the lesson there. And I mean, you do have to feel bad for the children who are being put through this because of the actions of these terrorists that ran the government in Gaza. And in reality, the Israelis have sacrificed more than 300 of their best and brightest specifically to wipe out that organization that held Gaza under its thumb. And so they have done the Gazans a favor. Now, it's an expensive favor on both sides. It's a painful favor, without a doubt, but they've done the Gazans a favor. And so because of that, even though it's going to take a long time to rebuild Gaza, hopefully Gaza will be better off and the whole region will be better off for it. Now, I think it's important, and you've heard me talk about this a lot. If you've watched me since the war started, you've heard this many times, and that is that they have to define victory very precisely. They have to do a good job of defining what victory is, because if they don't, the war will never end. You don't just fight until you get tired of fighting, because that's not how war works. You have to fight, as I was told in one of my shooting classes, that you have to shoot the bad guy not until you think he's dead. You have to shoot him until he thinks he's dead. And there's a real difference there sometimes. Well, Hamas doesn't quite think it's dead yet, but they're heading that way. And as far as Israel has defined victory in Gaza, which is to get back their hostages and to destroy Hamas militarily, they've done the latter and failed to do the former. Actually, the ability to keep those hostages has been really the only thing that Hamas has succeeded at, like I say, very, very great cost to their own people. And so the Israelis need to continue to push and not stop, not be finished until they accomplish that other goal, which is getting back their people. Hello, Mama Rissa. Good to see you. Thank you for being on tonight. Okay, so that's one of the key military successes, is they have decimated Hamas's infrastructure and leadership in Gaza. Like I say, the fact that there are still a couple of skippy military age males running around shooting back, uh, I mean, they may never be able to kill all the angry military age males in Gaza. So at some point, they're going to have to call that a win. But so far, they've done a pretty good job of rooting out. They've destroyed the tunnels. They've got the missiles and destroyed those. They've destroyed all the military infrastructure they've come across, and literally more than 10,000 terrorists out of that small uh, piece of land about the size of Philadelphia. So that's one strategic success on the part of Israel so far. What we're getting to here is what the United States needs to do to help them over the finish line. So stick around for that, because this is kind of important as we come up to a new presidency in the United States. We need to know what to watch for and what to pray for and what to lobby for in terms of assistance for Israel. And I'm also going to talk about what it costs, what it really costs us to do this. Because, the United States is involved in a lot of places around the world, and I see more and more Americans who say, we shouldn't be spending money on anything overseas. We've got homeless people in the street, as if giving money to homeless people is going to get them off the streets. If you really think that'll work, take a trip to San Francisco, where they literally have gourmet chefs driving around in food trucks handing out, steaks. I'm not kidding. This is no joke. Handing out gourmet food to the homeless, and they have one of the largest homeless problems in the entire country, and it keeps getting worse. They hand out free drugs to the drug addicts. Surprisingly enough, it keeps getting worse. Um, so, it's kind of simplistic to pretend that the United States is not capable of doing more than one thing at a time. Yes, we should be caring for our homeless and our veterans and our widows and orphans and our aged. And most of the caring for those people should not fall on the government. It should fall on you and me. It's our job to do that. Charity is not the government's job. Charity is our job. And when we expect the government to do our job, the government will always do it very, very poorly. And it will cost us a lot more money because the government has a lot more overhead than we do when we personally engage in charity. So I just say that to sort of lightly and gently castigate those who try to pretend that it's impossible for the United States, a country the size of ours, with $17 trillion economy, to do more than one thing at a time. So let's keep that in mind as we go through this and talk about what the United States ought to be doing to help Israel and what it will cost. Okay? Now let's back up a little bit and again give credit to Israel for what it has accomplished so far. It's had help from the United States and others, and that's fine. But most of the heavy lifting, virtually all of it, really, uh, has been done by the Israelis. Somebody says, "LOL." Jonathan LaFontaine says, "LOL gives free drugs." Yes, they actually do. They actually do hand out free drugs in Portland and San Francisco and places like that. If you don't believe me, just look it up, Google it. They actually do. I've seen it with my own eyes. So let's give Israel credit for eliminating Hezbollah's leadership from the top down, absolutely dismantling Hezbollah just piece by piece. And Israel has lost very few soldiers in the process of doing that. The vast majority of the damage that's been done to Hezbollah did not require any soldiers on the ground. The fact that they have troops on the ground in Lebanon and they're pushing further into Lebanon now and adding more troops up there, that's actually a follow-on operation to the initial operation against Hezbollah, which took out their leadership and most of their middle management with their Operation Grim Beeper. And now they've also been able to dismantle more than 80% of Hezbollah's stocks of missiles. So they had over 100,000 missiles and rockets pointed at Israel, donated by Iran, that now they're down to about 20, they believe, about 20,000. That's significant. That is very significant. Everybody, all the pundits and experts had said that if they went to war in Lebanon, that Israel would be seeing 6,000 rockets a day being fired at them for months. And Hezbollah has barely managed to fire off more than 200 in one day. And the number of rockets being fired at Israel has dropped by a third in the last 2 weeks, from 150 a day on average to now about 100 a day on average. Now, that's still 100 a day too many, but it's going the right direction. And Israel has now pushed 6 kilometers into Lebanon uh, along the front in most places along their border. This is striking. I mean, this is huge. They're creating a buffer zone in southern Lebanon that will allow their people to live safely in the north and go back to their homes. So they are making good progress on their military goals in the north. They've also struck strategic sites in Iran. And as a matter of fact, everything that's happened between Israel and Iran, the 2 strikes that Iran has made on Israel, and the one from April and then the one in October 1st, and then the one major strike that Israel made back against Iran on October 26th, laid bare the fact that Iran is actually kind of a paper tiger. Iran is, amazingly, they've got all these thousands of rockets. And as it turns out, they haven't been able to muster enough to actually do much damage at all to Israel. So a couple hundred rockets, a couple hundred, they had 300 rockets and drones on the first, when you include drones in the first attack. So far in those 2 attacks, no Israelis were harmed. Well, one, in the first attack, one uh, Bedouin girl was harmed, but nobody was killed. So Iran, on the other hand, suffered greatly from the attack that Israel did on the 26th. We found out yesterday that not only did Israel take out all of Iran's air defenses, leaving them wide open for follow-on attacks, but and not only did they strike those global mixers that mix the rocket fuel for their solid stage rockets, that's their long-range ballistic missiles, which makes it virtually impossible for them to make any more of those. But we found out yesterday that Israel also struck a secret nuclear research facility, which may have set back Iran's ability to make it to getting a nuclear bomb. So Israel is proving itself to be clever and resourceful and innovative, with or without assistance from the United States. When they have received assistance from the US, it has helped them be more effective, without a doubt. And if anything, the United States has benefited from what we've learned, or what Israel has learned through its intelligence gathering since October 7th. Israel went full court press on intel gathering, especially in Lebanon, after October 7th, to the point where, and again, I have to be careful what I reveal here, but let's just say that their intelligence gathering capabilities have taken on a new dimension since October 7th, to the point where it's likely that Israel will basically have a fly on the wall in any further developments that Hezbollah tries to make for the foreseeable future. They have basically figured out that Hezbollah is shot through with spies who are willing to turn over information for a little bit of money. We know that for a fact. But on top of that, Israel has employed some more creative measures that I'll just leave without describing. And Mama Rissa says, will the incoming administration provide Israel with more arms and possible manpower in Gaza? I'm getting to that, Rissa, so stay tuned. Folks, please like and share this. Just take a second and hit the like button. That tells YouTube that more people need to see this. And share it on your social media. Just hit the share button. That's that little arrow that goes like this. You can click that even while you're watching, and then share it to your Facebook, your Twitter, whatever, and say, hey, you guys need to see this. That helps CBN. Also, if you want to follow any more of my reporting, I'm going to be continuing my reporting on a tangentially related topic to this just after I end this live over on my YouTube channel, which is called The Hot Zone with Chuck Holton. And so I will be going live at 7 p.m. on The Hot Zone when I finish the 6 p.m. live on CBN. Okay, so I know I've got some of my viewers who are a little confused because they got an email that said I was going live at 7. I am going live at 7 on my channel, and I'll be doing this live until about 7 o'clock. Okay. All right. So we've discussed the clever tactics and the use of intelligence-driven assassinations, which Israel is still engaged in at a very high rate. They are doing these targeted assassinations to the point where everybody that is part of the IRGC or Hezbollah or the Hashishabi in the Iranian-backed militias in Syria and Iraq or Hamas or anything has got to be afraid to get in a vehicle. Has got to be afraid to use anything electronic. I mean, they were embedding explosives in concrete walls in places where they knew that their adversaries would walk by at some point and just waiting. And then eventually when that guy happened to take that route one day and go walking by that wall, somebody just goes, and the guy experiences a sudden rapid disassembly, unexpected to him. So now Israel has managed to do all of this, experience all of this progress for over a year in the midst of a bunch of opposition from their allies, from the people that say they were supposed to be supporting them. Oh, let me answer this question. Corrine Stefanko says, how are the IDF going to seal up all those tunnels? They seal them up with explosives. They just go completely. There were some other ways that they were sealing them, but that's the major way that they're doing it now. So the Israelis have had to put up with all kinds of backhanded opposition from their allies, where the United States, under the Biden administration, has been saying, our support for Israel is ironclad, and then going to Israel and saying, you got to lose the war. You got to lose. Would you just lose already, would you? Come on, give up. Don't do what it would take to actually win. That would look bad for us. That's not gonna help us in the election. And you know what? They were right, because all this winning that Israel has been doing certainly was not a help to the left wing of the Democratic Party in trying to get elected. And so there you go. Now, urging de-escalation has hindered Israel's efforts. Israel could have been much further ahead than they are, most likely, if the United States had not been constantly pumping the brakes. But that is what we're going to get to when we talk about what a new Trump administration could do to assist Israel. So just for an example, on April 14th, Biden made a phone call to Netanyahu. This is after the first April attack from Iran. So Iran fires 330 missiles and drones at Israel. To that point, it was the largest missile attack on a country in world history. And It's only been outdone by the second attack by Iran. But because no Israelis died in the attack, Biden calls Netanyahu on April 14th and urges him to take the win. You don't need to retaliate. Just take the win. Well, Israel listened in some sense. They didn't strike hard against Iran, but they did symbolically strike one of the air defense radar systems that Iran had at a sensitive site up in the north as a warning. And that warning should have been heeded, but it wasn't. So Israel has managed to persevere and succeed despite all the challenges, despite the worldwide condemnation, everybody trying to make Israel out to be the bad guy, despite the basically entirety of the mainstream press being fully in the tank for Hamas. Despite all of that, Israel has managed to persevere and succeed. Now, let's talk about what a new Trump administration could do to assist Israel by making some changes in U.S. policy. Now, first of all, if you look at what Biden did and you just did the opposite, okay, we can finish the video right now. Like we don't need to go much further. Just look at whatever Biden did and do the reverse of that, and we're done. Okay? But let's talk a little bit about it, a little more about it. If you look at Biden's approach of prioritizing de-escalation, look, this is something that apparently the Biden administration has never quite figured out, that if you are on offense and you're trying to destroy your enemy, but you're on offense, you're trying to take over his land, you're attacking his people, you're doing something like that, then yeah, I mean, you can choose to back off, de-escalate, take a break, have a tactical pause if you want. That's what offensive armies have the latitude to choose to do. But if you're on defense, if you are fighting an existential conflict, like the war in Ukraine right now, the Ukrainians, they don't have an option to, back off. Just take it easy for a while. Just don't go as hard, because all they're trying to do is just survive as a country. And this goes back to the very first point that I made in this live, that you have to remember, this is a defensive fight for Israel. This is not offensive. The fact that Israel is fighting this in Gaza and in Lebanon does not make it an offensive conflict. They are just going after the people who want to destroy them where they live, rather than waiting for those people to get into Israel. I mean, you think about that. If they're fighting, if this is actually a defensive conflict, and Israel decided not to go into Rafah, for example, just like the Biden administration told them to do. Biden administration said, don't go into Rafah, don't invade Rafah. If they'd said, okay, we'll just pull out of Gaza, leave a wounded but now very angry and stirred up populace of, Hamas fighters. Well, what do you think would happen? Israel would eventually be fighting those same Hamas fighters in Israel. It wasn't a matter of, if you just leave them alone, they'll leave you alone. No, that's not how Hamas worked. If you're fighting somebody who is committed to your destruction, the best place to defend yourself against them is not where you live and your family is, but where they live and their family is. That's the ideal. way to defend yourself. But Biden didn't understand that. Thank you, PC. Chuck, did you hear what Biden said to an Israeli journalist when he asked, do you think you'll get a hostage deal before you leave? He was rude to the journalist. No, I missed that. Send me a link if you have a link to what he said. That must have been while I was out for my mountain trail run today. So Biden's approach has been all wrong. Biden was essentially assuming that Israel was on offense. And that's also, incidentally, what all the protesters are asserting as well, that this is an offensive conflict that Israel didn't have to fight. And just think about that. Think about what happened on October 7th and try to convince yourself somehow that this is an offensive operation by Israel. Thank you, Lily. It's kind of you. Folks, if you'd like to contribute to CBN, the best way to do it is go to cbn.com and contribute over there. YouTube takes about 30% of whatever you donate here. So we love the people that donate here. Thank you very much for doing that. And if you want to keep doing it there, no problem. We'll take it. But if you want to get the most bang for your buck, the best place is to go to cbn.com and donate over there. Okay. So contrast what Biden has done throughout his presidency, even before the war started against Israel, to Trump's example of decisively supporting Israel at every turn. He moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. He recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. That's why there is actually a housing development going in on the Golan Heights called Trump Heights today. They named it after President Trump. Brokering the Abraham Accords. Just think about that. During the Trump administration, the first one, things got more peaceful in the Middle East. Trump was able to bring Arab Muslim countries to the table with Israel and sign peace agreements that were historic, that allowed trade and travel between their countries, and that brought those Arab Muslim countries into the axis of the good guys. So this is another point that we have to point out as we go into a new Trump presidency. This is not a war between Israel and Hamas or Israel and Hezbollah. This is a war between Iran, Russia, North Korea, China on one side, and this is a war on the other side between the United States, Israel, the UAE, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Morocco, and Jordan on the other side. If it wasn't for what Donald Trump did under the Abraham Accords, 4 of those countries would have not been part of the axis of good. That is spectacular, what he did. So I predict that under the Trump 47 regime, that we'll see a stronger alignment between the United States and Israel's military objectives, meaning we're going to back them to the hilt for offensive operations against Iran. I would even not be surprised to see actual U.S. special operations troops going into Gaza on day 1 or 2 of the Trump administration. Maybe it'll take longer than that to plan and train and prepare for that. But would not surprise me a bit if Trump actually authorized direct boots on the ground military action against Gaza, because we still have American hostages there. Did you realize that October 7th, in addition to being the worst, the most deadly attack against Jews since the Holocaust, was also the most deadly terror attack on Americans since 9/11. 33 Americans were killed on October 7th, and more taken hostage. So uh, this new administration will likely not take that as kindly as Joe Biden did. And I hope they don't. I mean, Donald Trump has already said the American hostages that are in Gaza had better be out of Gaza by the time I'm rolling down Pennsylvania Avenue to take up residence in the White House on January 20th, or there's going to be heck to pay. So let's hope that he makes good on that. Well, first of all, let's hope and pray that the Hamas and PIJ operatives who are holding those people see the light and decide that discretion is a better part of valor, and then just give them back. Let's just hope that happens. But if it doesn't happen, let's hope that Trump makes good on that promise, and that the Israelis won't be the only people on the ground in Gaza, and that things will get a whole lot more intense in Gaza for the short term, for a very short period of time. We'll clean it up, get our people back, and get out in short order. There's a very good potential that the Trump administration will increase military aid and access to more advanced U.S. weapon systems. That there's not going to be any of this holding the aid over Israel's head and saying, you better, pull out, or, decide to give up, or else we're not going to give you any more weapons. Diplomatic support for Israel's actions in the international arena will probably, well, without a doubt, are going to improve. And that means that the UN will be able to exert less pressure on Israel, because the United States will exert more pressure for Israel in those world bodies. So this is going to be, kind of give Israel some breathing room. And in order for the United States to make the right decision about how to best support Israel, the first thing we need to do is learn from our own mistakes. You look at what happened, even going, not, so the easy one is Afghanistan 2020. I mean, what a debacle. As it turns out, just declaring the war stopped when your enemy's not finished fighting, there's a term for that. It's called losing. It's called capitulating. And leaving behind, forget about the $86 billion in fungible and durable military equipment that's going to be shooting back at us at some point, but treasure troves of military computers at Bagram Airfield and other places that we just left, that immediately Chinese CCP aircraft were coming in and landing after we pulled out of, while we still had troops in Afghanistan. We pulled out of Bagram Air Base, left behind all this permanent infrastructure and all these computers and everything. And immediately CCP aircraft were coming in and landing and scooping up all that treasure trove of data. Do you think they didn't get any actionable intelligence out of that? You got another thing coming. I mean, what a absolute abject failure that was on the part of the US military and on the part of the Biden administration. And they paid for it in this election, I have no doubt. But you can go back further than that. It's not just something that happened under the Biden administration. The Obama administration liked to telegraph that we were going to give up on a certain day and leave. They tried to do it in Afghanistan and then weren't able to completely pull out. Going all the way back even to George Bush's, mission accomplished speech. As it turns out, a portion of the mission had been accomplished. This is back in 1990, right after the the shock and awe campaign in the Gulf War, first Gulf War. I'm sorry, not the first Gulf War, second Gulf War, the opening salvo of the Iraq War in 2003. George Bush, we toppled the Ba'athist regime in Iraq. We had not captured Saddam Hussein yet, but his government was defunct. And so George Bush stood up there and declared mission accomplished. Well, it was kind of premature, don't you think, since we were there for another, I don't know, almost 20 years. Vietnam, you could go back and look at what happened there. The lack of clear objectives, which were not well defined, led to a quagmire, both politically and militarily. We saw the same thing in Somalia. It's one of the reasons the whole Black Hawk Down incident took place, because we just dumped a bunch of money and materiel and men into those conflicts without sitting down and actually having some big boy thoughts for a while about what exactly that would mean. What does victory look like? How do we know when we're done and we can pull out? We failed to do that going into Afghanistan too. We were just so mad about 9/11 that we're just like, we're going to go and we're going to hurt some people. We're going to do bad things to bad people. Well, guess what? You're never going to run out of bad people to do things to. And so that is not a strategy for victory. You've got to come up with something that's more tangible than that. So the Trump administration, even though we are not directly fighting in this conflict, at least not with large numbers of troops. I mean, we do have troops directly involved in the defense of Israel. And we've got 40-something thousand U.S. troops in the region. We've got American Rangers from my unit that are in Syria right now, and they're shooting ISIS bad guys almost on a nightly basis. You didn't know that, but U.S. troops are involved in combat in Syria. We've got troops in Iraq. We've got troops all over the place. So before we, go whole hog supporting Israel, sending them everything they need or whatever, we've got to decide how we ensure that this does not become a open-ended commitment that's just going to drain us dry for the next 20 years. We already tried that. We tried the 20-year war. It didn't work out so well for us. So let's encourage our Congress critters and leadership to think very long and hard before they change their policies and start really turning on the spigots about when we should turn them off again. It's very important. Very, very important. If we don't do that, we risk getting into another quagmire and mission creep. Okay, we start out, well, we're going to support Israel. Well, then Israel becomes, well, we're going to take down Iran. And then, well, we're going to take down North Korea. Well, then they're going to, we're going to rebuild Lebanon. We're going to rebuild Gaza. We're going to rebuild the West Bank. We're going to build a Trump wall along the border with Israel and Lebanon. We're going to, this thing just, it'll creep and creep and creep and creep. And the next thing you know, we're fire hosing money at the problem in a way that just absolutely wastes millions of man years of U.S. taxpayer money. Do you realize that all these billions of dollars that we're spending represent a portion of your life? Because it's your tax dollars. You spend a portion of your life working, and then that money gets given to the government or taken by the government at the point of a gun, right? And that represents those man hours that you work to earn it. You essentially slaved away for the US government so that they could fire hose money at every problem on the planet. And so we should be a little more judicious about how we make commitments to anything in our country or out of our country, any kind of project. We should be more careful about it. Did you know that for every $1 billion that the US government spends, uh, there are about 153 million taxpayers, if I remember right, in the United States. 153.6 million taxpayers in the United States. If you divide that by $1 billion, every $1 billion the government spends costs you, the taxpayer, $6.51. Okay? So, for example, just to give you an idea, the United States so far has actually spent, not committed to spending, but actually spent in Ukraine, as of the most recent data I could find, $106 billion. So that would come out to $690 for every American taxpayer, not man, woman, and child, but just every person who files a tax return needs to, about $690 of your taxes goes to supporting the war in Ukraine. However, it's not that cut and dry, because of that $106 billion that's been spent on Ukraine, about 70 billion of it never left the United States. 70 billion of it was spent in the US economy on buying products made by Americans who are getting paid by the government. And then that money, whatever those products are, whether it's artillery shells, missiles, tanks, armored personnel carriers, whatever, is getting shipped over to Ukraine. But the money actually stays in the United States. And so you have to sort of discount that $6.91 per billion for the effect that spending that money, $70 billion of that 106 billion in Ukraine, has on the economy. And so what that does is it adjusts the amount that comes out of your pocket to go to support Ukraine from $690 per taxpayer to $235 per taxpayer. And I can put the calculations for this up over on chuckholton.com if you'd like to go through them and see how I arrived at these numbers. But suffice it to say, with that offset, each taxpayer would only have to contribute $235 for all of the support that we've so far given Ukraine in 3 years of fighting. So divide $235 by 3, and that's your annual commitment to Ukraine, US taxpayer. Personally, having spent a lot of time in Ukraine, I mean, it's worth it for me. I still think there's better ways we could have done it. I think that Ukraine could have received a lot more money if we had done it charitably rather than through the government. But It's kind of hard to charitably donate a HIMARS unit or a, M1 tank or something. Okay. So if you apply that to Israel, here's the thing. Annual military aid to Israel normally in normal years is about 3.8 billion. They're the largest uh, recipient of American funds in terms of military aid anywhere in the world in normal years. Now, in 2024, we added an additional $12.5 billion in direct military aid to Israel as of since October 2023. And about 85% of the 3.3 billion annual aid has to be spent as a part of the deal. In writing, it must be spent on US military goods. So if you assume that that 85% number applies to the rest of the money that the supplemental appropriations that we gave to Israel over the last year, then a large share of the money we've given to Israel has actually come back into the American economy and assisted the American economy. I firmly believe that's one of the reasons why the Biden administration has been so adamant at giving money to Ukraine, because they know that they're actually spending the money in the United States, and that just kind of pumps up the American economy in a somewhat artificial way. If that's an expense we don't have to undertake, then the US government, it's kind of a false way, or a fluffy way of puffing up the American economy. Okay. But in terms of what we gave to Israel, what the net contribution per person for the money we've given to Israel since the war started turns out to be about $106. Now, I know many, many of you who are watching have donated far more than $100 over the last year to CBN, to my Hot Zone podcast, and to other uh, charitable organizations that help Israel. And so, giving $106 of your tax dollars to uh, assist Israel is not going to chap you very, very hard, because you can, like, if you're like me, I mean, I can think of much worse things the US government does with my tax dollars than gives it to help Israel survive. But that's before you factor in the 85% number of the money that has to come back to the United States or be spent in the US. So again, just to make this clear, we're giving over $15 billion. It's $16.3 billion to Israel over the last year in military aid. But 85% of it has to be spent in the United States buying American products. And by buying American products, you're giving Americans jobs who then pay more taxes, who then, provide. I mean, it's a circular thing. So you get to discount the cost to the American taxpayer, and the discount in terms of the taxpayer contribution per person to the war in Israel goes from $106 per taxpayer to about $16 per taxpayer. So if you would be willing to buy a hamburger dinner for somebody in Israel, that's about what your taxes have contributed to Israel in the last year. Okay? And again, I can put all these numbers, all these calculations up over at chuckholton.com, and you can go look at them for yourself, and feel free to pick them apart and tell me where I'm wrong there. Okay. But I put a couple hours in on that today, making these calculations, and I'm pretty sure that's correct. So going back to what the Trump administration needs to do, if we define our role very specifically, that's step one. We need to help Israel by managing the expectations of what the outcome of this will be. So, what I mean is, we're not going to be able to make Gaza into a Jeffersonian democracy by June that is going to, welcome us with open arms every time a Jew walks into Gaza, where we're going to have, you know, lots of fun comedy between uh, Israelis and Gazans anytime soon. We can't expect that. However, so at the same time, when we need to avoid overpromising and help Israel avoid overpromising its citizens what victory will look like, we also should encourage Israel to think big about what victory ought to look like, not just getting your hostages back. That's a no-brainer. Not just uh, like uh, destroying Hamas's ability to threaten you or Hezbollah's ability to lob tubular complaints your way. Those are the easy those are layups. Let's, of course, but I think that Israel can use this war to not just accomplish those objectives, but to reshape the Middle East. And the United States can throw its weight behind Israel in this and make it much more likely to happen. We can build new alliances, even with historically hostile neighbors like Lebanon, or dare I say it, even Iran. You know that Iran and Israel have not always been enemies. They were friends at one time, not that long ago. They could be again. Many, many people inside Iran don't hate Israel, don't have any problem with Israel, don't see Israelis as enemies, and could easily see themselves being allies instead. That is possible. So not only should the United States encourage Israel to think big, but they should also assist Israel in countering and dismantling the proxy threats that are threatening Israel and the rest of the world. So the United States needs to be willing to go hard, maybe in creative ways like Israel has done with intelligence related coups like Operation Grim Reaper, stuff like that. Why, if Israel can be that clever, why can't we? Seriously. If the Trump administration will take the gloves off and the handcuffs off of, thank you, dear, of the good men and women at the CIA, why can't we come up with Operation Grim Reaper 2? 2, as in dos, numero deux, right? Why can't we do that? We should have we should have been leading the world and stuff like that. So the United States not only needs to ramp up its intelligence gathering and CIA capabilities, but we need to be willing to actually use military force to dismantle proxy threats and reduce the influence of that axis of evil around the world. Doing so would secure a more peaceful order for the entire planet. And we should be willing to think big and be bold and, yeah, throw our weight around a little bit to make that happen. We should also help Israel capitalize on its military victories to position itself as a stabilizing force in the Middle East. Israel is like, look, that whole region is a tinderbox, but Israel is the water in the desert. Israel has turned their portion of the desert green through their ingenuity. So why not help Israel capitalize on this event, take advantage of this crisis, and use that ingenuity to be a blessing to the entire Middle East? I think that's not just right, it's biblical, and it's even prophetic. So victory is not just an absence of threats in the Middle East. Victory is creating a new dynamic that with Israel at its center, that will bless everybody in the entire region. And that's what the Trump administration should be aiming for in its policies with regards to this conflict. Okay? So that's all I've got for today. It's 7 o'clock and I'm supposed to be going live now on my own channel. So I'm going to continue this conversation over at the Hot Zone with Chuck Holton here on YouTube. So give me a few minutes to get situated here and I'll be over there. You can go there right now. Make sure you subscribe while you're waiting, and I'll see you over there in just a few